Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Extraordinary Council meeting of 27th of August. I'd just like to welcome councillors, staff, the press and our consultants, and there's no members of the public here today. Councillors, we're audio only today. We're just having a couple of technical difficulties with the visual, so audio only, so please speak into your speakers and remember the one hand rule, face to the microphone so the people at home can hear us. And I'll call for apologies. We're all here. Item number 2, extraordinary business. I know of none. There is none. Declarations of interest. There is none. Move on to item 4, which is the well, just before we go on to that, I was going to say it's a big day, big council day today, this extraordinary meeting. We've got 2 major decisions to make. One is on the library civic building, and the other one is on our 3 waters, progressing that. So a reasonably big decision day for us today. So we'll move on to item number 4, which is the Ashburton Library and Civic Project Approval of Final Design. And the PCG met this morning, and they've brought this recommendation to us here today, and from that PCG meeting to this council meeting. So we have that recommendation in front of us. I'll hand over to Hamish to or introduce. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's my pleasure to introduce Sean Pont from the Logic Group and Trevor Watt from Athfields Architects. Trevor will now run through the detailed design of our new library and civic centre project. The opportunity for questions and then council to make a decision whether or not to approve this design for the next stage. So if I hand over to Trevor, and if you could run through the presentation, it will take roughly 3/4 of an hour to run through it all. So if Trevor could do that now, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to sort of share where the detailed design for the building has progressed, particularly over the last sort of few months. So we've got quite a lot of detail here on the screen around the sort of the design and colours and finishes, and bearing to quite a lot of detail. And we can end also on a bit of, we've got a couple of fly-throughs of the library and also the civic spaces. I guess the starting point, we've been working through the sort of concept design for a good 18 months now. So starting with the site, when it had the county building, so the site there is in blue, and you've got quite a lot of existing sort of character buildings on the site with the church, Pioneer Hall and 255. But I guess at this stage of our project, when we're sort of just getting into construction documentation, it's always good to step back to look at those first sort of concept principles. And so you can always, as I go through the design, you can always sort of refer back to these and benchmark them against it. So one of the key first ones is that sort of connection to the square and I guess bearing square east. And it's not about an object, it's about that connection to place. It's quite a large building, so kind of breaking up in form. So it relates to the scale of Ashburton as a townscape. We introduced the idea of the sort of a secure east-facing courtyard that has good accessibility from the library, so the ability that activities in the library can actually spill out into an external space. The idea that the integration, even though it was part of the project, looking at how it may integrate with the bearing square east, and not just necessarily treating that as one big open space, but having slightly different qualities of external space in relation to the new building. I guess celebrating the edges, having quite an active, it's quite a high profile site, so having quite active frontage. And also the ability to, I guess, celebrate the democracy. So what makes these buildings special as civic buildings, I guess, is what these rooms, and having, I guess, democracy on display. So not necessarily sort of tucking the chambers in the back corner, but kind of having a visible expression. We think it's sort of positive. Food's always really good to get to have in particularly library buildings. It helps activate the space, it brings people into the space, allows them to hang out in the space longer. So the integration of that sort of espresso cafe is positive in the project, and making sure it's in a location which is visible and also can kind of spill outside as a different threshold into the building. The idea of circulating it in loops, so minimising cul-de-sacs. We have just over 50 car parks on site, but it's not a site that gets dominated. You don't want to dominate it with car parking. Making a meaningful use of the character building. So it's some interesting sort of Pioneer Hall was initially an interesting challenge on the site, being quite a small building. So it has been good to develop an interesting sort of concept around that. Celebrating the views to the Alps. So the three-level nature of the building allows those fantastic views to particularly the west. And then potentially there's a couple of other sort of empty sites, if you like, around. So potentially development in this area can reinforce the town centre development, which there does seem to be a bit of building happening around town at the present time. And that's also around further sort of CBD revitalisation. So those are the key principles, and I think they're still all pretty sound. So I won't go into too much of these plans. So the planning itself has been around for a good sort of 6 to 9 months. So the pink area is the library, the yellow area is the welcoming sort of space, I guess the blended space between the library and the civic building, and the blues workspace. So one of the key areas is the EOC, Emergency Operations Centre, is a separate standalone single-storey building accessible from all sides, and all those buildings sort of form the sort of internal secure sort of courtyard. So where our plans are actually developed is into detailed documentation, which is all these sort of black and whites, how the builder's going to build the building. But there's currently about 500 pages of this, which is probably not a great idea to go through today, but sort of revert back to our coloured version. So level 1 has we're starting to get a bit more split between library and workspace, and we actually position the chambers as a public space, so it can actually sit between the actual civic function and workspace function, but also sit as a library function. So we've tried to make this building as flexible as possible, so not just have a chambers which is just for councillors, but having it with a number of different public and staff functions. With the majority of the staff are located on the upper floor, with a good outlook from the social kitchen, and grouping of sort of workspaces, a few enclosed offices, and quite a lot of sort of collaborative sort of furniture as well. So one of the big positives about the project that was the sort of sustainability aspect, and particularly introducing the timber structure. And it's actually, there's not many timber buildings around the country. Does have some great seismic resilience properties. You end up with a lighter building. We've actually got this rocking frame, so in earthquakes it actually can rock and then self-right. So effectively there's some springs and attenuators which are sort of connected to the base of those walls. But because of the unique nature of the timber structure, we certainly look to express that in the building, both internally and externally. To offset the timber, do quite a lot of glazing, I guess, in key points without it being overglazed. And we've complemented the timber with glass reinforced concrete sort of tiles, so they're really durable sort of product. There's no painting or maintenance. But we've kept that in kind of the similar sort of timber sort of tone. Then we have a couple of sort of elements around the entry canopies in stainless steel, and also we've got this perforated stainless steel sort of cladding that wraps around the chambers, and I think we'll touch on that reference a bit later. So on the rear face of the building, we've actually clad the EOC single story building in vertical larch, and so again that'll weather and have some patina. And then we have more neutral sort of metal claddings and polycarbonate and aluminium and other parts. And in certain areas we've got mesh, and we're looking to have climbers that go up in sort of walls and stuff, so that starts to integrate a green nature to the building. So quite a natural palette of materials externally. So elevations on the top is the one that's facing Bering Square. So again, there's a reasonable amount of glazing mixed with the rain screen in the darker brown, and then you do have that sort of rhythm of the timber structure that does come through, and there is a reference to even the sort of old county building with the rhythm of the columns. So there's kind of a reference to the past there. The bottom elevation is for Havelock Street, and so you can see how we've sort of integrated sort of Pioneer Hall. So this building is reasonably large, so you can see we've broken up the forms, broken up the different types of materials as well, and that helps to sort of bring the scale of the building down in the streetscape. So the neutral tones also help to highlight the existing character buildings on the site with the red brick, so you can kind of see in those elevations the red brick kind of pops out. Top elevation is from the eastern perspective. You see the EOC is a little timber building at the frontage, so it has all the emergency generators and transformers and masts and aerials tucked around the back, but effectively that is a standalone building. It can operate in its own right from the rest of the building, and it's important levels 4. And the bottom one is the elevation to the north. Again, the bottom part of the darker brown area is right near the annex to the church, so you don't tend to see that. What you see is sort of those white floating forms above, which sort of circulate a couple of external courtyards. And you sort of get the idea with these mesh screens with climbers, start to do some sort of simple sort of green walls. Sustainability is a big part of the project. So some of the big ticket items there it's definitely the timber structure, but the other one was the heating and cooling system utilising the artesian water. So it is a method that's been used in Canterbury quite a bit, but it's the most efficient way of running the heating and cooling system is that sort of utilising that energy transfer through the aquifer. There's other features with lighting controls. We've got cabling for potential photovoltaics on the roof, low flow taps. We're looking at this in the courtyard. We have a rain garden, so all the hard surfaces flow into the rain garden before connecting into the stormwater system. But we've been looking at all aspects, even the fact we've got electric car parks, we've got good access for cycle parking, and also providing good shower facilities to support and encourage cycling as well. So all those have been incorporated in the final design. So I guess this is in the context, or the immediate context, and particularly with the Bearing Square East. Again, we've always treated this design as not being an object in its own right, but needing to integrate with the square. And so even from day one, we looked at how that may occur, and just particularly the street. I mean, the Bearing Square East itself tends to be okay with a little bit of tweaking, but the interface between the street itself to the building is probably the key part. We're just looking to potentially rearrange the parking, make it more of a pedestrian-friendly sort of space on the frontage. And so the library can spill out to that and also form the front entry and effectively a town square. So that's just sort of level 1, so marching up the building with the council chamber on that level. We did talk about where the chamber would be. It tends to work better on that upper level, so many times when the blinds are down you don't want a dead space, so we've made sure the ground floor of the building is quite active, a lot of windows so they don't get closed up, so you see people in the building and it's not just a blank wall. On the upper main workspace, and then there's a roof, so we've kind of treated it as 1, 2, 3 buildings with a bit of a glazed link between the two, as opposed to if that was one really big building, it would start to feel quite bulky. External views. So this is from the north church on the left. So they are looking at doing an annex on the southern side of their building, and so that abuts straight to our building as well. So we have been talking to them to try and get some pretty good integration between the two new buildings on the site. So again, predominantly you do read the timber, you do read the glazing, but again we've got that sort of expression for the council chamber as well, with a little bit of stainless steel and a few other things happening. So the main entry is actually centred on the clock tower. So that's another way of kind of reinforcing that connection between the square and the monument there, and also to the building. It's effectively the civic kind of entry to the building itself. And from the Havelock Street frontage. So there's two, I guess, public entries into the buildings. It's a long building, so it's good to be able to enter it from a couple of different positions. So the civic entry is on Berling Square, and then there's a library entry. You can enter the library from either side, but from Havelock Street. So the ground floor, the slope, there's actually a slope across the whole site, about 1.6 metres, so it's quite a slope. You don't really notice it. You might notice it now with the buildings cleared. But the different shades of pink show how the different floor levels on the ground steps down to meet the surrounding ground. So again, you don't want a building on that bottom corner sticking 1.5 out of the ground. Particularly, you want to get good connectivity to the courtyard. So there's about a 450 step each time, but we have quite generous ramps, quite low slope ramps, so you don't really notice it, but particularly with moving prams and trolleys around, you do need to have quite generous ramps and not just stairs. The front entry is flat, so it's fully accessible from that frontage, and there's a little ramp from the Havelock Street. There's also a separate staff entry from the car parking at the back as well, and that goes directly into their sort of shower facilities and toilet facilities and changing facilities before moving into the upper levels. There's two lifts in the building, so one that goes to all 3 floors and one to go to 2 public floors. So again, we've got 2 lifts because the length of the building is sort of about 66 metres long. Go quickly through there. So it's a building with these sort of dual functions between library and workspace. So we've been sort of plotting out where the security lines go between the two, and how that security line might actually change depending on the time of day. And also because there's different hours of operations between the office operation and the library, there's different configurations with during council hours, particularly on the front door, and also at the weekend. So the ability that the library can bleed into that customer services space when the office building is not in use. A few detailed areas of the front customer services. So it is a model based on a sort of a concierge kind of customer services model. So there's particularly a help desk as you first enter into the door, showing the pointer in this location. There's also desking with more sort of long-term sort of inquiries, but importantly, and I guess in the red, is happening more and more is a self-service. So self-service area as far as for the library for taking up books, but also around sort of council operations as well. So we've got that as a central sort of island in the area because it's going to evolve as more and more people will basically use self-service. So we've had to future-proof it for now to do a range of functions. Through that foyer space is also through here, this little nook is district information, so brochures for visitors, and there's also a large display screen through here as you enter the building, so that may also display what's happening around the district. So it's doing a number of things, the main foyer, information, I guess council customer services, and also a library function. Oops. Again, we wanted the chambers, or the brief was for the chambers to be quite a multifunctional space, not just for the councillors, but that is a core function. So this series of slides just sort of look at the different modes and the different areas of security and how people access it. So the one on the left is a council meeting. The next one is sort of after hours community events when maybe the office is shut. So the blue kind of looks at where the security line may be. It could be work for an office event or a large workspace event in blue, but also it could happen, you could have a large event in here which is accessible from the library side as well. So the council chamber has been positioned sort of between library and workspace, so it can have a number of different operations which may evolve over time, but just certainly just future-proofs the building going forward. So layouts of chambers is usually pretty detailed, looking at where sort of media, public enter, access for councillors, where leadership team may sit relative to the screen. So we've landed on probably the more ideal scenario is that having the screen behind the front table. It means that everyone can actually see that except the front desk, and then you have a separate sort of TV screen through here. So it allows me, when I'm having a pointer to the screen, everyone can actually look at the same screen as opposed to these dual screen operation at the moment and people having to turn around. So we've actually got the projection screen here, and there's some monitors on the side to maybe support what's on the screen or have the agenda on it. So we've gone through that into quite a lot of detail, benchmark it against other sort of chambers around. But the key interesting thing here, it does have this sort of glazing to the frontage to Bearing Square. So you do have the ability to look out the windows as opposed to being a black box. And we also have the ability to go outside and call it the civic balcony, which sounds quite grand, but the ability to go outside and look over the, I guess, the Bearing Square and the clock tower. And that's how it sort of feeds. So interesting thing with the main section, the main workspace, we've got a little bit of height, so we can get natural light through that space. So I guess that's where most of the staff are accommodated in that main bar. Certainly the chamber sort of tucks through here and extends out, and then the mesh screen is on the outside. So right from the beginning, a key part of this sort of project, and particularly these buildings which have that public function, you're expressing the community, is how can these buildings from a design sense take on a bit of the, I guess, of the context of the region. So you'll see as we sort of map through the materials and palettes, we're certainly trying to bring it back to Ashburton region. But one of the things I guess is when we first workshopped, talking about the region is, I guess, a major seed and grain producer, but also obviously a strong sort of dairy industry around as well. So kind of thought that that language of sort of silos and tanks for dairying was kind of an interesting thing to try and integrate in the building in some ways. So that's, I guess, where the idea with a curved sort of mesh screen, which is perforated, so it also acts as a solar screening device, and sort of carving out what is actually an A in elevation there for Ashburton or something else, which wraps around that sort of projecting deck. And so we also have stainless steel on the two entry points, and also wrapping around the key meeting space as well. So again, it's quite nice to introduce a different type of material in that sort of neutral palette for the rest of the building, and allows good position for the crest and aspects like that. So that's an interior view. So it's really useful that access to light's kind of useful, particularly if like meetings go on all day. Ability, at least you can see out the window and see that you're missing the sunshine. But also the ability that some of these windows may come down as blackout, and also keep some others open as well. So trying to define the council chamber tables itself, and the ceilings and the flooring. But also we've got a storage space, so all those tables and chairs can be taken out, and so you can have quite large sort of gatherings or civic occasions in that space. So the foyer outside, so that looks into the event space. I guess those images at the bottom probably give you an idea of what the timber structure, so these sort of thin walls. So it is radiated pine, it's kind of laminated together, so it's a little bit rustic. It does have sort of knots and grain in it. So we do offset that with kind of timber veneers, which are a little bit more sort of finished as well. So you get a nice contrast between slightly rustic and sort of more finished surfaces. So material. So this was the other area where there's an aspect to bring that sort of language of Ashburton within the building. So looking at the sort of wetlands, rivers, and agriculture in different fashions, and also I guess given the different levels, some different identity as well as you move through the buildings. Maybe a slightly different sort of colour palette as you go through, as opposed to the whole building being exactly the same. but obviously the region does provide a sort of raft of interesting sort of opportunities. So interior finishes, I guess when you select material finishes, I guess one key aspect, particularly in public buildings, you want really durable materials. So we try and not have too much like just painted chipboard in those public spaces. So from both an aesthetic and also durability perspective. So on the applied wall finishes, we do have sort of timber laminated panels. We do bring some of those external treatments inside and also have softer acoustic treatment on the walls. The ceilings are dominated by, I guess, the timber ceiling, which is part of the structural system. It's called a podius system, so it has the ability to have 600 of timber, and then we have 600 of recessed acoustic material. So that'll be kind of a strong sort of element on the ceiling, but also quite a heavy timber element. But the rest we do have some also jib ceilings covering some intense areas of mechanical plant, which are also perforated for acoustic treatment. The flooring, we've got bluestone, timber bluestone, which is kind of reasonably local as far as bluestone is concerned, in the sort of public foyer areas with harder wearing, some timber flooring in certain areas, but we've quite keen to introduce wool broadloom carpet, particularly in those major meeting spaces, chambers, event space, large meeting rooms, and we're also looking at getting quite a strong custom design in that carpet. So again, the ability to make that bespoke for Ashburton, particularly in those key interfaces with the council and public, and also playing around with, I guess, the carpet tile arrangements to start to pick up that language of the district. You can see the colour tone is still pretty neutral, but we still have elements of colour in certain sort of key areas to liven the building up a little bit. And also conscious that making sure we're selecting as many materials that are locally sourced as possible, so the ability for local sort of contractors and subbies to input into the design or into the build. So it is quite a big building. So we're actually using and not a lot of walls, and a lot of the walls are actually the structural walls. So we're actually using the flooring as an opportunity to create, I guess, little rooms within the bigger spaces, but also to look at, I guess, that patchwork of the planes, and also a few sort of pops of colour in a few sort of places, and things like the blue there in the Pioneer Hall and the event space, which is through here and here, are certainly good opportunities to introduce that wall broadloom carpet with a custom design, which there's a number of different sort of opportunities to do some interesting things with that. So on level 2, so again, broadloom carpet through the chambers and the large meeting rooms, again, custom design, and then we've got the sort of simple graphic within the actual text, like a textual graphic within the carpet tiles areas, and some of the collaborative areas with brighter sort of colours as well. And then in the top floor. So some of our initial ideas, just working through the actual detail and sort of the final colour palette. So guys are kind of looking at the sort of, I see these radishes there, so we're told that you guys supply 90% of the world's radish, so we'll get the radishes in somehow. It looks like it's going to be the colour of it. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few subtle things we're still sort of working through, but yeah, the building's so large and there's quite a lot of opportunities to do some interesting things. Wall finishes I've sort of touched on, so you can kind of see the palette. We're introducing a little bit more timber in certain areas, certainly around the council chambers, and some more sort of battened areas as well. So there's some textural finishes, and there's that brick of the Pioneer Hall, which also wraps into the building as a bit of a burst of colour. It's going up. So the ceilings. So the ceilings, you can see the stripy brown and the grey. So that's all the timber structural floor that you see in the brown, and then in between that we introduced the acoustic material, either a softer All-Tex product or an acoustic ceiling tile. The white's perforated chipboard in areas where we've got more surfaces going through. So it's reasonably sort of simple. There's a few opportunities that we might be able to get some graphics integrated into some of these ply ceilings in certain areas, but that's something we're sort of working through as well. So you can see it's a similar sort of palette as we go up the different floors, a number of different sort of textural changes, but reasonably sort of neutral sort of tones. So the library, we're working with the library staff here and our consultants quite a bit. So the library has a number of little, I guess, different functions within a bigger framework. So you have to cater for kids, adults, areas to lounge, informal, and then sort of space for shelves and browsing and events as well. So we've actually, this is a library which has quite a few sort of nooks and crannies in different areas. So we've just sort of mapped the way through there. So we're working at the staff about the staff points, where the computers go and the like, in these sort of these diagrams over the last sort of 6 months. So we also thought that the opportunity around shelving, to help the shelving start to have not just straight shelving, but introduce some curves to start to, the shelving themselves start to frame spaces within larger volumes. And I guess sort of picking up some of the languages of rivers. Quite a detailed exercise around the different types of shelves in different areas. So there's been a lot of work that's sort of making sure everything fits in this future expansion. And so we've kind of buried down to quite a lot of detail. So this is a bit more of a detailed plan around the Havelock Street entry. So there's a little key plan at the top which shows you where you are. So this is a Havelock Street entry with the espresso bar in the corner with access to the Bering Square edge, so it spills out, but also captures people as they wander through. So it's in a location where it's right next to things like the magazines, part of the library, so people can grab a magazine, grab a coffee, and so it ends up being a more integrated part of the library itself. So important part with these buildings is kind of future-proofing the buildings as much as possible. So a lot of discussion around the size. So at the moment it's an espresso cafe, so a smaller scale, but we have sort of future-proofed the space and done a nominal layout of that kitchen, and that was to expand to a slightly larger operation in the future. But at the moment it's proposed as the espresso scenario. So moving along, Bering Square is straight out the window. So we look at those opportunities that people can sit against this edge. So there's some custom seating, maybe open some windows to get some good connection to the outside. This is the area around the stairs. We've got some integrated magazine rack. So again, you can grab it and have a seat or grab a coffee. Computer spaces and then lots of different sort of library operations. I guess this was an interesting space that was integrated into the building as this sort of event performance space. So it's half-tiered built-in seating and also half flat floor, which provides a degree of flexibility with whatever the performances or events can be. So the ability to project onto a large wall at the end, and also the ability for that to open out to a large meeting room, and also importantly that connection to the courtyard. So that actually connects. There's also a stair there which connects to the upper floor. So the upper floor looks down into that space and out to that green area. So the courtyard's it's not just a single space, because that level difference that I talked about earlier. It's actually divided into a number of sort of different sort of functions. So we do have a function here from the event space. We kind of introduce this sort of tonal checkerboard fashion. So potentially it could be an informal chess match that happens out there, or it could be just want to encourage a number of different opportunities. So the large meeting space here can spill out to that as sort of through breaks. There's kind of a low ramp, and then this area down here is connected to the children's library. So again, also connected to the wetter activity space. So we do see a number of those sort of kid activities spilling out to the external space. So you can kind of have different events happening in this space, and it's not just one big open area. The central garden, its ability to walk through that, got a bit of a mound that kids can climb over as well, some seating and deck area under a sort of a feature special tree, because the nature of the space too is you do from 3 levels look down on the top of it, so we do want to kind of look kind of interesting from above as well as being functional from below. And this edge of the car park is effectively a mesh wall with climbers on it, so eventually it will be a green screen or a green backdrop. So we sort of have the event space opening into it. We have the large meeting room EOC meeting into it. We have the kids area entering into it, activity space entering into it, and the office space looking over it. So again, it's key to get activity around all those edges to make it as interesting as possible. That centre space is a rain garden, so this paving area sort of spills into that, and there's the intent with this planting, it picks up some of the planting of the region, which may change over the seasons as well. So really sort of unique aspect of the project is the integration of the Pioneer Hall. So there's some structural strengthening to it, but we're actually looking to build it within the building itself over a clear atrium space. We're taking off the roof so you can actually look down into it, but we're kind of keeping the chimney. And we do have this large opening which opens into the kids' area of the library. So we kind of see that as a bit of a nook, a bit of a story time area. And so it's something that's pretty sort of unique to this project. And we haven't actually found yet another sort of example in New Zealand of kind of building over a heritage building. So that's kind of the view, so you can kind of experience it. The front sort of meter projects out onto the street, so we have a recessed glazed wall and a glass roof, so you can kind of see into it, you can see out of it, and it's quite a interesting space. The rest of the kids area, so we've been plotting in the Lego area and sort of computer area. We have a large parenting space on that corner as well, and there's a number of sort of seating areas connection to the courtyard to the right there. So look and feel looking into the Pioneer Hall opening beyond. So upstairs, so these are probably more the, I guess, non-fiction, more adult sort of friendly spaces. So again, there's lots of nooks where you can sort of lounge against the edge to Bering Square. Obviously the shelving areas, there's sort of toilets scattered around the building, good access to lifts, and staff work points. The centre area here, which looks into the event space, is the youth area. So again, a number of sort of probably beanbags and soft seating, there's shelving and books through here, and that extends across the bridge link. So you look into the Pioneer Hall, or you occupy this edge here that looks into the courtyard. So again, that's particularly in the morning and late morning. There's sort of really sort of sunny spots. And so there's actually the ability to kind of follow the sun, if you like, around the building and find a sort of a corner to hang out. And then the south building, the non-fiction, also has this larger closed-off learning lab, so it's a flexible space. And then there's a number of seating areas and sort of non-fiction collections. But again, through here you can look down into Pioneer Hall. Other sort of functions within the library space is this sound booth and AV lab. So it's a soundproof sound booth with windows, so you can do work on the computer here, and you can kind of play within this sort of zone here. So it's in a reasonably sort of discrete location, but it has quite a lot of soundproofing obviously around it. But it's obviously pretty. It's not available in the current library, so it's something that's more of a contemporary aspect of modern libraries. So through the centre, near the Havelock Street entry, is an activity space, or it's available for sort of different sort of crafts and other sort of even wet activities. So it's a space which is separated into two zones, so sort of a wet area with sinks, so you could be painting here and doing artwork or maker space. But also have another space here which you can do other sort of crafts as well, and that sort of connects into the children's library, connects into the outside courtyard space, and also connects into the upper part of the library by the entry as well. So things that are being talked about in that space is painting, 3D printing, electronic making, sewing machines, overlocker, and scan and cut. So So there's a number of sort of extract and sinks and different functions against that edge. So we want these spaces to have a number of activities, so you can close that space off from the rest of the library as well. And then upstairs it's more like a traditional classroom type activities, but you can also do VR, Chromebooks, tablets, and sort of it's a flexible space. Staff workroom in the library has good access and visibility to the front of house, but also has a direct connection to the courtyard. There's that sort of supervision over that space, particularly as it connects into the children's library. So we have actually buried into quite a lot of detail. So even to the extent of sort of where the rubbish bins go and recycling bins, because sometimes they kind of pop up at the end. So we were particularly keen that we managed to capture this level of detail in a design, as opposed to sort of right at the end. So there's a bit of a strategy around the waste in the building. Workspace. So again, connection to site, the ability to, particularly in the carpet, to start to pick up that patchwork of the planes, but also some other references to, I guess, the agricultural connection. So placement of people against light, looking at circulation patterns, has been sort of part of the exercise of laying out workspace. So there's been an exercise working with the teams about where the staff goes, where the different teams go within the building. So we've been mapping that out over the last sort of 6 months. So a few snips of the front foyer, customer services. So down here you have customer services, back of house. There's some meeting rooms, but there's also quite a lot of collaborative space. So you don't need to always meet in a meeting room. The ability, if you have some leaners or some other furniture or some couches, you can actually meet with the staff in a slightly sort of more informal sort of environment. So we are providing a number of different options around that, including that sort of self-help function. Toilets. So for the staff, we particularly when you want to encourage, I guess, non-car use, particularly cycles, that you do, it's important to provide good lockers, good shower facilities, but also for all the sort of the building consent inspectors. We've sort of got mud rooms and drying rooms all in that back of house area. So again, a few snippets of the look and feel of the building. So one thing you didn't notice is that there is that strong sort of lineal line on the ceiling. So that's actually the structural timber flooring system that you do see. And there's a recessed area which we do put the acoustic treatment in between there. And there's also where generally the lights and other services sort of go. So material palette in that front entry is that bluestone paving. You've got the timber and some other sort of timber fins and wall treatment around, but pretty kind of neutral tones. And there's a bit of a popper colour in some of the flooring. So as you work your way up the buildings, there's a mixer stair, the sort of staff room, which has good access to the balcony facing northwest. So again, there's that fantastic perspective to the mountains and the afternoon sun. So we want to utilise that with the placement of those facilities within the building. So one of the areas we're used to, I guess, the main workspace on the upper floor, where there's a large amount of people, is trying to make sure it's got some generous height, the ability to get some natural light into the building, so you're not relying on the artificial lighting all the time. But with that span, it also allowed us the opportunity to put in a sort of a bowstring truss, and we also, I guess, it kind of has that reference to the pivot irrigators that you see quite a bit around here, which we're always keen to try and work out how we could fit that into the design. But it is actually a structural sort of truss system, so there's that reference there without being exactly the same. We were going to use the irrigators as sprinkler pipes, but I thought that might be a bit over the top. It was tempting. So we've got into quite a lot of detail around, there's a lot of custom joinery, so what makes these buildings really interesting is those nooks and crannies, some built-in sort of custom joinery and seating into the fins, and also shelving. So that's kind of takes a building from just sort of being a standard building to being a bit more bespoke. So you can kind of see there's quite a lot of custom sort of joinery which has been designed into the building. And a few snippets of the the social kitchen. Again, pretty neutral palette of materials, but there's a little bit of colour in the actual loose furniture as well. The EOC kitchen, the chambers kitchen, there's the water treatment lab, printery bays. So there's areas we try to get a bit more acoustic treatment, so there's always tends to be a bit more noise around those areas, so we tend to put some more acoustic treatment on the walls and the ceilings in these areas. The wellness room. And then we also have buried into all sort of furniture, different types. So we have looked at the different ways the council works. There's been a lot of surveying with the staff as well to make sure it's not just work points, but it's a collaborative approach. So not only the interface with the public is being more collaborative, but more interface between the different departments within council. So that's all about providing appropriate furniture for what they do, but we are introducing kind of a range of different kind of furniture types, not trying to build too many meeting rooms, but allowing the furniture to actually provide those sort of meeting spaces. So it allows for more efficient buildings. You're not doing a whole lot of meeting rooms that don't get utilised all the time. You're doing more leaner, so people can have sort of quick sort of meetings, and also we can use these slightly taller sort of devices and to break out what could be quite a large space, and the ability to also integrate a bit more planting within that workspace. So that's kind of a really quick summary of sort of the look and feel of the building. We do have a couple of fly-throughs that probably give you a more holistic view, but is there any questions on?
We'll just do your fly-through first, I think, Trevor, and then we'll take some questions after that.
So a couple of fly-throughs. One's through the Havelock entry and wanders through the library. So I guess it is a library that's not just one big volume. There's a lot of nooks and crannies, so it makes people more comfortable, but I'll try and talk your way through it. So this is coming from the lane, from I guess the grocers, to the Havelock Street entry, so you can kind of see Pioneer Hall. So one reason we put the cafe against that front edge was to allow, when you're walking into the building, you kind of get those views into the cafe, rather than this being kind of a tunnel. So you'll notice that slight ramp from that entry as you walk through. So the cafe's on the left, and then we do have this stair, that round stair that circulates up to the upper floor, and we do have on the other side the integration of the magazines. So through here is quite a number of different functions in the libraries. You've got the computers, you've got different shelving. Can't afford books, but that'll come later. But modern libraries do quite a lot of things. So this brings you into the main event space, performance space, and with a great connectivity to the outdoor sort of courtyard. So you can see the outdoor courtyard has another number of different levels. We really want that sort of tree to be a kind of a specimen tree that sort of develops and keen to be deciduous as well, so you do see the changing seasons. But the ability for the space to be quite sort of active and with good connectivity. We're now going to the children's library with the Pioneer Hall in the background. So again, Pioneer Hall with that red brick does provide quite an interesting sort of focal point. And so inside there it's lined with plywood, which is doing the structural strengthening, but we take out the roof linings and just leave the original heritage timbers in the chimney in the space, so you can actually see down. So this is up there another ramp that can get sort of snapshots into the wet activity space, and we have a lot of integrated sort of shelving as well. So that's what we talked about, that wet activity space, a lot of crafts, maker space, a range of different things. So it could be a whole lot of kids doing painting, which spill out into the cafe, into the courtyard. This is the bridge, Pioneer Hall on the right, and the sort of seating looks into the courtyard was on the left. And these are probably slightly more quieter areas on the upper floor, so the ability to hanging out against that edge, and probably the non-fiction books are located up on this level. And then that's looking into the cafe. You can kind of see the EOC. I can probably stop it. So that's that bridge. So the ability at these sort of different edges, so that's facing sort of northeast, looking into the courtyard, and you can kind of see the EOC as being a single level building, which is all clad in large timber, so it's quite low level, so it still lets a lot of that sun come into the space. And it's, so it's actually the key thing with that courtyard, it's interesting looking down from above, but also it's quite active from below as well. So this is moving into the youth area, so it looks into the event space, so you can kind of think they can hang out on the tiered seating there. And this is moving into the non-fiction section, which looks out onto Bearing Square and the clock. So it's kind of wandering through the library. And so the next one kind of takes you up we refer to as a civic entry and up to the council chamber. So it's an important part of the building. It's kind of that access to the clock tower, because it's such an iconic part of Ashburton, as are the whaleboats. And the monument centred on the new entry. You kind of see at the top there's the staff balcony, so you can kind of get activation on the edge. So you move through that more civic sort of square into the main foyer. So library on the right, customer services are on the left, and that first sort of help point through there with a large sort of screen, the lift that's looking towards the library. Meeting rooms. So again, we've got another sort of shiny box that comes through the space. So moving up to the chambers and the governance area. So again, that's centred on the clock tower, so that goes into the mayoral office and councillor's lounge. So there's different, again, the building can open and close in different ways. So this is now moving into the council chambers as more the public entrance, and that space looks into the event space to the courtyard beyond. So you do get some really interesting, this double height space with different glimpses. It makes the building reasonably sort of dynamic. So the council chamber in projector mode, and then the ability to can open up the windows and get that connection to the square. So quite a lot of sort of celebrating sort of timber, and then got that sort of custom carpet which will have connection to landscape as well, and then the ability to break out space, or even with visitors, kind of thinking you have international visitors, quite nice to be able to get outside, look at the square and to the Alps and beyond. So that's where we are. A lot to take in.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Trevor. That's really good. There's been a lot of work to get to this stage where we're at now, which is good. There's a lot of info in there, and what I like about it is the link. Well, you've got the link up there for Bearing Square, the Civic Centre Square, and the link, and that's out for consultation at the moment. That square, so and you've linked those in on what the consultation's about, which is good. It looks very functional to me. And I like the integration of how you've integrated Pioneer Hall in there. It's, as you said, first time in New Zealand, I think that's done. So that's really good the way that is looking. And I like the use of timber, which is a natural product, and even fitting the courtyard. And it's really good having that in there, strategically placed for that green area and getting fresh air and what have you as well there. But there's a lot of detail in there, and I know the media and people at home have thinking, well, that's a lot, and they'd like to go back and have a look at that at their leisure. So question for you, Hamish, when will that be made available for the public to peruse at their pleasure?
Through Mr Mayor, we will be posting the fly-throughs and the information on our website at the conclusion of this meeting, as on the assumption, of course, that Council does adopt these designs.
Great. So, councillors, over to you for questions, and Councillor Brown, we might have the lights on too if we could have that.
I'm really impressed, to be quite honest, Mr. Mayor. We've been working on this for the last 2.5, 3 years, and longer before that. But it's just been amazing flying through it, see what you've got there, and I really enjoy the different shapes and the different heights. My main thing when we started off was it's going to be a damn big building, overpowering the whole area, and it's not. It's nice. It's warm. It's open. You hit it all. I'm really impressed. Thank you for that.
Councillor Lovett?
I'm just quite impressed how you've used all the textures throughout the building. I'm sure the farming community will be really happy. I'm a grain grower and have silos, so yeah, no, I'm really happy with it. Just got a couple of questions. The timber, are you going to leave any of it natural for the smells and that from that? And also Pioneer Hall, are we getting any money from the Historical Society or anything to help kind of get that building to where it's going to need to be in the future?
Which one to start with? Yes, I guess with the timber, there's quite a few different timbers in the building. So one will I'll probably feel like we'll leave to weather as the larch, so kind of softens to that more sort of grain. But quite a lot of the other timbers will be sort of probably kept more as that sort of the timbery colour without weathering. But there are quite a lot of different timbers in the building, so it's not just one. So it'll be a bit of a mix. You talk.
With regards to the funding for heritage, we did explore early on some opportunities to see whether we could tap into some heritage funding for that building. I'm pretty sure New Zealand Historics Place, I think that's what they are now, or Heritage New Zealand, sorry, they have a fund called an Equip Fund. So there's still work to be done on that. Just need to understand the dynamics around how that fits, whether it is applicable to trusts or community or private ownership. I know there are some rules around what that fund relates to, so jury's still out on that, but it's still something that can be explored a bit further.
Councillor Latham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Congratulations. I'm relatively new to this whole project, but I must say I'm impressed, and here we are, we're all ready to go. We'll have Bering Square, we'll have the new building, and we'll have the CBD done. So the next thing is the time frame. What are we looking at for when tenders are going to be called? What's the time frame there?
So we're just about to, or subject to council signing this off, we're about to embark on pulling together all the tender documents, which will be a full schedule of quantities, and going out to tender mid-October is our target date for publicly issuing the tenders through the council's Tenderlink website.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure when the ratepayers or the public see the actual figures that we put on our website and walk through the building, I think I heard 500 pages of specifications, they'll see the complexity of what we get for 51 million. And I'm really pleased. Initially, I wanted no butyl rubber roof, and we haven't got a butyl rubber roof. So many public buildings nowadays are flat butyl rubber roofs that leaks, and we haven't got one this time. We've got a genuine slope.
Councillor Rawlinson?
Thank you, and congratulations, guys, on what you've presented to us today. And I'm loving the way you've incorporated many features of our district, colour-wise and structure-wise. My only question is just around the flooring. On the high tread areas, you're going to have the carpet tiles and hard floors, and the woolen carpet will be more in the corporate areas. Would that be?
Yeah, I guess we just the broadloom carpet. We're looking in those sort of special, and particularly the communal public areas as well, but not just sort of. And we do see that as another opportunity to get some like a unique bespoke design incorporated as well, and sort of pulling out some more sort of aspects of the region. But yes, generally the carpet tiles in the higher wearing sort of areas. But we also are looking at utilising the carpet tiles to enhance the design as well, because again, there's not a lot of walls in the building, and a lot of the walls of the structure. So the flooring does actually provide quite a good scope to do some more sort of interesting designs.
Thank you. And having been a passionate wool grower of the past, I'm very pleased to see wool being in the building.
Councillor Falloon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you for all the work you've done. It looks impressive. As long as the final building is as impressive, we'll be very happy. The question I have is, you mentioned that there was a lot of fitted joinery going into it. By fitted joinery, do you mean the bookshelves, and are they part of the build cost, or are they part of what has got to come after the building has been built?
So within the budget is all the loose furniture as well, and so you can see that's why we've got all those furniture schedules. But the different types of built-in, there's a few built. So where there's walls, instead of leaving wall, we sort of built-in shelving. That means, and it's a good use of that wall space. We also have like in the fins and the windows, you have built-in like seating, like nooks and stuff, as opposed to you could always do a loose seat and just put it in there. But it always feels much more integrated if there's some, because we do find that the areas of the buildings that people do appreciate the most are kind of the furniture, the joinery, because it's a bit they sort of touch and feel and probably slightly more interesting. So it's really important to get those parts right. But we've had to, I guess, just get that balance between too much built-in, furniture that reduces the flexibility versus some that make more interesting. Particularly in libraries, it's really important to have, particularly those knocks that people can kind of not hide away but feel a lot more comfortable sort of reading a book in or using an iPad or something like that. So it's certainly a balance, but furniture and all that built joinery which is seen is included in the costings.
Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, and this is very exciting today for us. Last term we had a workshop where we sat down and sort of visualised what we thought could be part of this building, and you've brought it all together, and it's fantastic to see. And then we went through our consultation process and had a submission from one of our residents about incorporating timber. We've done that. Sustainability's been something that we've had our eye on, and it's all in there, so fantastic. And if there's no further questions, I'd love to move the recommendation.
I just have one question.
You have one.
Yeah, and we looked at energy efficiency, and we're using the water to from the ground to heat and cool the building, which is good. We've you positioned it with glass to get the sun using the solar, and we've talked about solar for on the roof for electricity, but we're not there at that stage yet. But how are we future-proofing for that?
Yeah, so future-proofing, sort of running the cables to allow that to happen. So it's really sort of, if it does happen, it's putting on the roof and effectively just connecting into the cables which are already there. So kind of future-proofing for ease of use, because running the cables to the right places is a bit that's quite difficult later on.
Yep. That's really good. So I have a mover, which is Councillor McMillan, and I'm happy to second. Open for debate. Do you want to read the recommendation, Councillor McMillan? Oh, we adopt. Yep. Oh, Councillor McMillan, remove the word confirm, put adopt.
Okay, that council adopts the detailed design and recommends this design as the basis on which to proceed to the construction tender phase of the Ashburton Library and Civic Centre project.
Thank you. Move Councillor McMillan, seconded myself. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Well done. Next step. It's a big step. Great. Thank you very much for the team down there. Your work has, well, Sean's anyway, is just starting, really. And Trevor, you're a fair way through yours, so thank you. Next item of business is number 5, Three Waters Service Delivery Reform Stimulus Program. We've been hearing a wee bit about this lately. Hamish has been keeping us up to date on that. We have a recommendation there which is quite long and lengthy. Does anyone have any questions of Hamish, or Hamish, did you want to talk or add any more information to what we've already got?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I think it's all there. The key decision here is around signing the memorandum to access two things really. The first tranche of revenue for the Three Waters infrastructure, and secondly to then participate and exchange information with the reform process to ultimately come to a view as to whether it is the right thing for our council to commit fully in approximately a year's time. So that's the purpose of what we're doing here. I just note that the delivery plan, which will be the plan which will outline the physical works that we intend to do with the money, is not due for another month. And so while the MOU and the funding agreement are before you now, the delivery plan needs to be compiled and sent to the DIA by the end of September. It is our intention that council will decide what projects to include in that delivery plan, and that we will bring a draft recommendation to you for your meeting on the 24th of September. So this is not currently, the detail of the work is not currently a matter before you, but you will have the say on that by the end of September. But happy to answer any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Councillor Cameron?
I note there's two sums of money. There's the initial approximately $4 million, and then there's a subsequent.
Yep.
In the reading, it suggests that the subsequent amount of money is $4 million, but it's allocated by a region, and the region has to apportion that. How likely are we to get the $4 million, or will it be the bigger cities in our region get more of a say as to how that regional distribution split's going to happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the way the process works is the second half of the money, if you like, the second $4 million. So all of Canterbury has $100 million available to it for spending on Three Waters. The first 50 is allocated as per our four. The second 50, we need to go through a process with our neighbours in the Canterbury region to assess whether or not we can agree on regional priorities for that second 50 million. In the absence of being able to agree, then the steering committee's recommendation, which the minister has accepted, is that it drop back to the same formula which the first 50 was distributed. So if the region doesn't settle on a regional priority, then we will absolutely get the 4 million. The only matter that is not known to us sitting here is that the second 50 million is only available if 2/3 of councils in the region commit to the first 50. But anecdotally, we're hearing that that is highly likely to be achieved, and therefore we can expect either regional priorities to be agreed or a second lot of 4 million.
So we can be reasonably confident we'd at least get 4 million of the second lot, because our representative probably wouldn't agree to the allocation that we would get less than that, I would assume.
That's right. There's some process to follow here where we have to have a genuine attempt at a regional priority allocation, but the reason I'm explaining the process in the absence of that is that may well be the situation.
And one more question. I note we've got to have our project sent away by the end of September.
Yes.
How likely is that? Like, do we have the resources for that, and can we can achieve that?
Yes, we certainly will have the resources to bring that project to you. The project is not the government isn't going to approve the project other than to make sure that it conforms to the Three Waters reform criteria. So the choice of what we spend the money on is very much ours, as long as it generally conforms. We can't we can't act badly and spend it on something else. But they're not there to say, no, that's not your priority in the Three Waters, you should be spending on something else in the Three Waters. It will be for us. What we know around the rules of that is we can't, if the work is already funded, i.e. it's in this year's annual plan, then it doesn't qualify. So we don't get to take the 4 million and offset commitments we've already made. So essentially what we are doing is needing to bring forward work that would otherwise be being done, perhaps it's already in the LTP beyond this current year, and bring that forward. Or we could choose to propose work that is not in any future planning, but the risk of that is that we would almost certainly have an obligation to consult our community. Because yes, that's right, and then there's time and process, and the community's views may not be supportive. So, the best thing for us to do in the work that Neil and his team are doing is looking at our proposed works that are beyond this next 12-month period or the current year we're in, and bringing forward work that's already been consulted on via the LTP, and bringing it forward. The second part of your question, in relation to the capacity to get the work done, the rules of this money are that work has to have commenced by March 2021 and needs to have been completed by March 2022. And there is certainly commentary around the country about the capacity of the industry, the construction industry, the water industry, to get all that done because there's 67 councils contemplating this reform process and the money. Having said that, this is the government's response to the shovel-ready proposals we all made over the first lockdown. So we all said as councils, these projects are ready to go, we can get these done or started within the next 6 months, I think was the criteria. So we'll be doing absolutely everything to guarantee that the projects we put forward can comply in all parts with the government's reform package.
Councillor Lovett?
I was just going to ask, have we got an absolute guarantee from the government that we don't have to pay back this money if we do pull out on that second triage?
The memorandum of understanding has a life of 12 months. It expires at the end of 12 months. It is really explicit and says that there is no binding commitment to the reform process beyond the life of that MOU. So in a legal sense, I'm satisfied and happy to give you that advice that signing the MOU and accepting the Tranche 1 funding does not commit council to ongoing process. What it does require of us, however, is to have an open mind over the next 12 months to what is in the best interests of the community in relation to the provision of Three Waters services. And so we need to approach the next 12 months in a manner that puts the community need first, and we genuinely understand whether or not the reform is in the best interests of our community. So we are required to have an open mind, but it does not bind us beyond the Tranche 1 money.
Councillor Rawlinson?
Thank you, and just wanted to clarify that if the council chose not to opt in, you cannot retrospectively opt in and get the first round of money after you've done the work. I just want to clarify that for anyone listening.
No, that's 100% correct, Councillor. You can opt into the reform process at a future point if we decided that, in fact, we did wish to be part of it. But if we don't sign this memorandum of understanding and get it to the DAA by 31 August, then that money disappears for us.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Have we got a guarantee from Parliament as a whole to all political parties, if there is a change of coalition, is there a risk that perhaps anything can change?
I'm not quite sure what anything might mean in your question, Councillor Wilson. There's certainly signing the MOU becomes a legal agreement between ourselves and the Crown to receive money and to participate with an open mind in a process. No one will be able to overturn that. But what happens with the reform program beyond this MOU, if political parties change their mind or a government changed and there was a different perspective from someone else, that's still clearly the prerogative of the government at the time. But in terms of what's in front of you today, there's no sense that this can be overturned.
Councillor Flynn?
I'm just asking if there are any other questions. If not, I would like to move recommendations 1 through 7. To me, we would be idiots not to take this up. Both of those agreements there are some of the most innocuous agreements I've ever seen. They bind us to nothing, and so we may as well have, there is no really debate to have. The next debate we will have will come the end of September, when we decide whether we're going to go into the regional grouping or not. And that will elicit some very interesting views around this table. I can see that now. But just for the moment, I fully support recommendations 1 through 7.
8.
8, is it?
There's one over the page.
Oh, shit, I missed that one.
I have a mover through Councillor Falloon for recommendations 1 to 8, and Councillor Brahm has seconded.
Correct, I'll go to number 8. And for the same reasons, we're silly if we're not doing it. It's money for grabs. If we decided something else, I think it will be, I'm not sure. But, hey, let's take this first.
Open for debate. Councillor Letham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to endorse the movers' comments. We've got nothing to lose to take the first tranche, and it'll give us time to take a deep breath and review when the second tranche comes along. We've got nothing to lose. I support the motion.
You are correct. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Never look a gift horse in the mouth, we'll take the money. I just want to say a couple of things. In my considered opinion, this is the start of local government reorganisation in New Zealand. It amazes me that councils around New Zealand have built town halls, civic centres, whole heap of stuff, America's Cup, and have forgotten about their infrastructure, such as the important services to people when they push the button and turn on the tap. This council, the Ashburton District Council, has a history of looking after those more serious topics first, and congratulations must go to all former councillors for doing that. The other thing is, the thing that actually set this alight to me actually really amazes me. It is because a council did not put a concrete block wellhead around a well on a sheep farm, and people died. That's what started all this, and that is appalling in this world. The fact that Auckland, for example, I might as well have a crack while I'm having a crack. Auckland, for example, say that they have been waiting for 9 years to process a resource consent to take water from the Waikato River. I've never heard a baby cry so much, Mr Mayor. Those that know the Resource Management Act know that if you want to, you can move it faster. Someone somewhere is not supplying information, someone somewhere is not talking to someone, somewhere hasn't done a consultation with someone for that sort of thing to happen. This is a giant cover-up, I think actually politically, to smooth out the country ready for an upcoming event that's going to happen on the 17th of October. No. So it actually appalls me, but Mr Mayor, we have to take the money. The next decision is what we spend it on. We've all got a rough idea, and it's later down the track, but by then we may see some further light. We have to take the money.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Falloon, right a reply, if needed?
No, I think everyone's had a crack.
I'll put the motion. I am in favour. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Next item of business, number 6. It's on my page 61. There's a recommendation there that Council uplifts the item of business adjourned on the 13th of August 2020. I'll move that. Councillor Milling, seconded.
Thank you.
And it is, welcome Sarah James. We've got the report in front of us. Any questions of our stuff? Councillor Cameron.
I've just got a few. I've read the report a few times. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, if we publish the helipad's location in the Aeronautical Information publication, that makes no difference to the unmanned UVAs, you know, drones, having still to seek permission from the hospital to go above 400 feet or 120, depending on location, I think. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, with regards to that, you're correct. Whether we publish it or establish it as a published helipad or not, because it is a helipad, it is there, it is in use, it automatically by CAA regulations has that 4 kilometre radius around it. So what we're not doing it, if we don't choose to establish it, is to provide information on the right website when good people are checking, so that they can find out the details of how and who to contact. So we're kind of not helping them in the process.
That's okay. So there's no benefit in not publishing. My only concern is, and I've got a query, if a 15-year-old kid got a 26-kilogram drone for his birthday and wanted to go across on Saturday afternoon to fly his drone in the domain, he has to get, as I understand it, permission from the hospital to do so.
Through you, Mr. Chair, firstly, if it's the weight that you describe,
Intentionally
technically describe that particular drone as a large drone, and it's a different licence, and it's Part 102, which is requirement them to be a commercial pilot. For a smaller drone, which a recreational user would use, they would still have to follow the civil aviation regulations in relations to the operations around the helipad. So they would still need to apply for the flight permission.
Mr. Mayor, I've just got one. So any drone still has to go to the hospital to get permission to fly, as long if they're outside of a protected area or trees or a house or whatever. How do they do that? Can you explain to me how they would do that on a Saturday afternoon if they hadn't thought about it?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the two circles on map 1, the yellow and the red, are the areas where a flight needs to be notified in advance.
Yeah.
And that does cover most of
the town.
Well, it does.
Yeah.
With regards to that, how they do it, they go onto the website being Airshare, log in with, just create a profile like you have to do for everything, and then they get the contact details of who they need to do. If it's a flight below 400 feet within the 4K and it's out of the domain, like i.e. the direct landing zones, it is a simple process of an email or phone call, just confirmation of we're loading this flight. And as you can see later in the report on the picture, where there's a number of pins, they are being done, which is fantastic. So it is a process, but it's not one, unless there's risk involved, it's not one that's a hard process to do. It's just a requirement.
And this is happening all throughout towns in New Zealand and cities that have, like the whole of Christchurch must be covered because they've got helipads and airports and everything too.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, when we met with Christchurch City Hospital and their safety manager, he says on average Christchurch Hospital receives 1,000 requests a year for drone flights within the helipads for the hospitals at Christchurch Hospital and Burnside Hospital.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Who actually polices it? If as Carolyn says, somebody's grandchild takes it out and flies a kite or a drone without authorisation, do the police called, or who actually polices what's happening?
It would be somebody contacting CAA and saying that there was a breach. Clearly, CAA looks into things that are of significant risk or an event that has happened. So if a drone collided with a helicopter that then included it to be a crash, all the things would be looked into. If it happened and they were unaware that it had happened and there was no incidents, I suspect it's like driving down the road without your seatbelt on. If you're not caught, you're not caught. But you should be wearing your seatbelt.
Councillor Lovett?
I was just going to ask, if we pass this today, will we be putting up signage in the domain saying the helipad is in our domain, just to warn people, because there's nothing anywhere around at the moment. And would it be wise just to put signage up?
There is a signage project, so it's going to link in with that, but there may be some specific signage closer to the helipad itself. I just don't want to commit without the open spaces manager having some input into that process. But we do need to promote it to ensure that people don't accidentally breach the rules unintentionally.
Councillor Ethan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Leaning a wee bit towards Councillor Wilson, I think it's a good idea. We must have clear access for rescue helicopters to come into the hospital, but you get, Grandad gives 12-year-old grandson a little thing to play with, and he goes out to the domain, he flies it around. Other people are there, they don't take any notice, they don't know that he may be breaking the rules, they don't know who to go and see if he is breaking the rules. So I think we do need to make sure it is well notified, well signed, so that we can reduce the risk as much as possible.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If there's no more questions, I'm happy to move it. The reason, if we save one life, it's more worth than going around with drones in the domain.
I just have one question before you do move it.
That's
and it's on number 1, grants approval for GCH Aviation and Helicopters Otago to use it. What if there's other helicopters out there that want to use it? They won't be able to?
Mr Chair, are you referring to other emergency helicopters?
Yeah.
In that regards, those helicopters have to use the visual flight rules, or VFR, which is currently what Garden City helicopters use.
Good. Thanks for that clarification. Councillor Brum has moved. Councillor Cameron seconding.
Yeah, seconded, and I'd like to ask something as well.
Okay.
So say it was another helicopter agency that did use it, they would just go through this process and get their instrumental flight rules and all the rest passed.
It would depend how often they
There
were
would be
flying here.
What I'm getting at is there's no anti-competitive sort of behaviour between emergency helicopters.
No.
No.
Councillor Mackay.
Oh, just a question, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Latham. He talked about granddads. I was wondering, does that mean grandmas are not allowed to misbehave either?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I object to the sexist comment there, really. I'm sure Grandma was quite happy to provide a drone for grandson.
Luckily that wasn't a point of order, but I'll go to Councillor Rawlinson.
I support the motion, but just my question again is regarding the small drones. A photographer who wants to go into the domain and do some aerial photography, where do they sit in this?
It falls into the shielded operation, so people can fly drones in the domain. What part of the domain dictates the rules? If it's in the bit where the helicopters are coming down and up, there's more stringent rules. If it's in the bit that's in the yellow section, there are less stringent rules. But because you're in the 4K zone, you still have to go through the notification process. So it doesn't stop people, but it's about doing it in a safe manner.
Thank you. And I think that's where it's going to be important to publicise it, because I know someone who's a very good photographer who's just got a drone and they're busy taking photographs all around our district, but they're the kind of people we need to reach. Thank you.
I think if people have got drones, they need to be aware of how to operate them, where and when and what have you. So it's part of their responsibility of having a drone. You can't just put one up in the air and expect nothing. Councillor Brum, right a reply if needed. I'll put the motion. I'm in favour. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We're going to break now for lunch, actually. We're going to move into committee first. So I'd like to move that we move into committee. Councillor Brown, Councillor Rawlinson, and we'll have lunch, and we're due back 2:15, I think, Philippa, open for community services. Oh, in committee though. Yep. Oh, 2 p.m. 2 p.m. will be starting the community services meeting. Yep. Great. So we'll break now adjourn now for lunch. Thank you.